Hey, it's Kaero. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm taking a look at the rares in white for Dominaria United, or the ones that we have seen so far, and rating them for competitive standard play, both in paper and MTG Arena, in reference to ranked. If you like the video, please hit that thumbs up for me. Consider subscribing to the channel for future updates, and without further ado, let's go. First up, we have Anointed Peacekeeper. It costs 1 white, 2 generic, and it's a human cleric, which are going to be relevant creature types in standard. It's a 3/3 with vigilance, so it's going to be able to attack and defend pretty easily in the early game. Anointed Peacekeeper also states that as it enters the battlefield, you can look at an opponent's hand, then choose any card name. Spells your opponents cast with the chosen name cost 2 generic mana more to cast, and activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to activate unless they are mana abilities. So if you've been playing Standard for the past year, you're probably thinking that the obvious comparison here is Elite Spellbinder, which will be rotating out as Strixhaven goes in the next few days. I think that's a fair comparison, but this card is different in a few ways. First, the Anointed Peacekeeper does not exile a card from the opponent's hand and tax the cost like Spellbinder does. That means the Anointed Peacekeeper must remain on the battlefield if you want that tax to apply. This makes its effects easier to mitigate if the opponent has removal in hand. However, Peacekeeper does more than Spellbinder in that it also taxes activated abilities. Where this is going to hurt the opponent the most is choosing a Planeswalker. Not only will it cost 2 more to cast, but each time the opponent wants to activate a loyalty ability on their Planeswalker, it now costs 2 mana, which severely impacts the opponent's plan. The draw of Planeswalkers is that they're supposed to be kind of an upfront investment that generates value over time without using mana, so the player is free to do other things, and choosing a Planeswalker with this card is going to feel great when you can do it. I think this card will see play as it's really a mix of Elite Spellbinder and Redain God of the Worthy, which both had homes in mono-white aggro. And the fact that it costs 3 means it can slot right in the spot that they leave when they rotate, and even if it's not main deckable, it will definitely see a sideboard slot for when these effects are needed. I think this card is a 7 out of 10. Next we have Archangel of Wrath. It is a 2 white for 3/4 flying lifelink angel, and that is a very efficient cost for a creature of this caliber, but that's not all. It also has a kicker of 1 black and or 1 red, so you're able to kick this twice if you have access to the mana. Archangel of Wrath also says when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it deals 2 damage to any target. And when Archangel of Wrath enters the battlefield, if it was kicked twice, it deals 2 damage to any target. So I think the most likely place for this is to be used in a Boros aggro deck at the top end of the mana curve. Being able to cast this for 5 and either kill an opponent's creature, kill one of their Planeswalker with low loyalty, or deal damage directly to the face like a shock is flexible and can be just what Boros aggro needs to get that last bit of lethal damage in. Also, in aggro mirrors, having the ability to gain 3 life each turn this deals damage, either in the form of blocking or attacking in the air, is a huge benefit. If both of you are trying to kill each other as quickly as possible, lifelink just wins you the game by making it impossible for your opponent to kill you before you kill them. And before we move on, I think it's important to note that we did see a powerful Urza of Angels build in Standard with the release of Streets of New Capenna, mostly due to Giada Font of Hope. But so many of those angels will be rotating out of Standard, I think it's unlikely that we see this in Angel Tribal in Standard. I think it's much more likely to slot into Boros than Orzhov, just due to not having enough support for angels. That being said, having Giada on the field playing this on turn 3 as a 4/5 feels pretty good, and we're getting a few more angels in Dominaria United. They also cost quite a bit more mana, but I'll be covering them shortly, and they're also pretty good. This card is an 8 out of 10. Okay, so here we have Danitha, Benalia's Hope. She costs 1 white, 4 generic for a 4/4 first strike, vigilance, lifelink, and she also states that when she enters the battlefield, you may put an aura or equipment card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield attached to Danitha. I think Danitha is good, but I'm skeptical it'll see Standard play due to the lack of really great auras or equipment. In other formats where there are more options, such as Embercleave or some normally really high-costed equipment that you get to attach for free, I see her being pretty good, but I don't think that she has the support in Standard immediately after rotation. It's also important to note here that you need to have the equipment or aura you wish to attach in your hand for Danitha's Enter the Battlefield effect to work. This does not search your library like other cards we've seen designed for aura decks. That being said, the keywords are highly desirable, and you don't feel bad playing this card just for those, really, but I'm not sure you want to pay 5 for it. That is a high cost in an aggressive deck, and by that time, the opponent may have ways of dealing with Danitha in terms of blockers with higher toughness, counterspells in blue, and board wipes. If Danitha only had Vigilance and Lifelink without the first strike, and we got that cost maybe down to 4, I think it would be more likely to see play, but at this time, for Standard, I think Danitha is about a 5 out of 10. Next up, we have Defiler of Faith. This is part of a Defiler cycle of cards, and each color has one. They all give you the ability to pay 2 life when casting permanent spells of their color, and in return making them cost 1 mana less of that color. This is a 5-drop, 5/5 Vigilance, and in addition to making white permanent spells cheaper, every time you cast a white permanent spell, you make a 1/1 white soldier token. This card seems simple enough, but I find it a little bit hard to rate. The main question here is, what do we do with the 1/1 soldiers, and what spells do we want to cast for 1 less mana, and how does that benefit our game plan? My gut says that this is a card for control, possibly Urza, using the tokens as chump blockers and sacrifice fodder, or in mid-range. I find it really hard to imagine a world where you play this in an aggressive deck. By the time turn 5 rolls around, you want to be closing out the game, and 1/1s are nearly useless in combat as the aggressor. Not only that, but you need to be casting a lot of permanent spells to generate them. Overall, I think this may be the worst of the Defiler cycle, as the others seem to have abilities that work more towards their goal than Defiler of Faith. And this is the kind of card that could evolve over time as we add more new cards to Standard with new set releases, but right now I don't think the 5-mana investment on this is worth it when we have Planeswalkers, we have Sanctuary Warden, where we probably would rather play that, even for 1 more mana. I think for Standard construction, right now I'm giving this a 4 out of 10. So this next card can be kind of polarizing, I think, among the community. We're getting a new 2-drop in Guardian of New Benalia. It's a 2/2 that has the new mechanic Enlist, which means as it attacks, you can tap another untapped creature without summoning sickness, and when you do, add that creature's power to the Guardian's power. It also says that when it enlists, scry 2. You can also discard a card, give it indestructible until end of turn, and tap it. Now that is a lot of text for a 2-drop, and it's a lot to digest. The thing that's cool about this card is that it's able to modify its own power throughout the game, allowing it to attack well past the early game. One thing to keep in mind is that enlisting is done when the Guardian is declared as an attacker, meaning that you will be tapping a creature in addition to the Guardian, and this is where that last line of text comes into play. If the opponent responds with instant speed removal, that would normally feel really bad because you've invested resources into the Guardian, but in this case you're able to discard a card and give it indestructible against that removal, and also de-incentivize them from blocking it as it's indestructible. This is Seasoned Hollowblade vibes, but I just don't think it's as good as Seasoned Hollowblade. Downsides are it's going to feel very bad when you enlist a creature, attack with this, and the opponent uses an exile effect with Wandering Emperor or the new Leyline Binding card we'll see in a few minutes to take this creature out, leaving you without a blocker since you tapped a creature to invest into the Guardian's power with Enlist. This card will also not be able to get around Meathook Massacre, Blood Tithe Harvester, or anything that gives the creature -X/-X, such as the new black card. I believe it's called Drag to the Bottom. So the indestructible clause of this looks less impressive the more that we think about it. Ultimately, I think the card is fine. It is good in certain scenarios. It's not great, and I think it looks more impressive than it is. I think I'm giving it a 5 out of 10 right now. Next up is Leyline Binding, which costs 1 white and 5 generic for an enchantment, which exiles any non-land permanent an opponent controls until Leyline Binding leaves the battlefield. But it also has Domain, a returning mechanic to Dominaria United, which makes it cost 1 generic mana less for each land type you control, and it also has Flash, which might be one of the more impressive things about the card. This card is strong. Paying 5 for this, because presumably you'll at least have 1 Plains in play, doesn't feel great, but when we consider that the Triome lands from Streets of New Capenna count as 3 basic land types, this gets considerably stronger, with Domain being easier to trigger. Paying 3 when you have a Triome out to exile any non-land permanent at instant speed is very strong, and I expect this will see play in 3-color decks which have white mana in them. On top of this efficient removal, we also have enchantment synergies with things like Zur Eternal Schemer that's coming out, Hallowed Haunting from Crimson Vow, and enchantment synergies we saw in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. I'm giving this card an 8 out of 10. Next up, we have another angel, Serra Paragon. This is a mythic rare, and like Archangel of Wrath, this is 2 white for a 3/4 flying angel. It doesn't have the lifelink, but it also states that once during each of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, exile it, and you gain 2 life. This is an incredibly powerful ability, especially in white that doesn't get access to much card draw. Being able to play things from your graveyard once per turn, or even lands if you need to, even at mana value 3 or less, is very powerful. Kind of makes your graveyard function like an additional hand, because in white you're going to have a lot of high value spells that cost 2 or 3. White is known for having great removal based on enter the battlefield effects in the form of enchantments that we can recast with this if they're taken out. We're also able to recast saga spells, since when they fully resolve, they hit the graveyard. We can also cast Brutal Cathar from the graveyard, exile one of our opponent's creatures. There are plenty of targets for this to hit, and I think this is a bomb, and this gives white what it needs in the form of pseudo card draw by being able to replay things. This is a 9 out of 10. Next up is yet another angel in the form of Serra Redeemer. At 2 white, 3 generic for a total of 5 mana, we get a 2/4 flying angel that also states whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, put 2 +1/+1 counters on that creature. Right off the bat, this card doesn't impress me all that much. First of all, paying 5 for a 2/4 with flying makes it really unlikely to be able to do much by itself. It only attacks for 2. It asks a lot of you before it can really start accruing value. It wants you to basically either be, on the best case scenario, making tokens with a generator of some sort, or to cast cheap creatures, and by turn 5, I think the time for that is basically over. There may be some control decks that are able to take advantage of this by making a ton of tokens at once or something like that. That remains to be seen. And yes, the creatures enter the battlefield with counters, as opposed to this having some sort of anthem effect on it, so once they're there, they stay, the counters stay, and it's permanent. But they have to be small creatures, which is kind of the opposite of what you want to be doing on turn 6 or turn 7. And to me, this card doesn't affect the board much, and as much as I'd like to see for a 5-drop. So I'm going to give this card a 4 out of 10 right now, possibly better as we go on. And we see more build-arounds with this card, but it doesn't look like it's going to see much play right now to me. Here's a new enchantment for Dominaria United. It's 2 white, 1 generic that exiles each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until it leaves the battlefield. This card is fantastic against all tokens of every kind. It is great in a control deck against a hyper-aggressive deck like mono red or mono white aggro, provided that you don't get taxed on this and you can play it on turn 3. And it absolutely crushes. It's a death blow to anybody playing a Rakdos build around Oni Cult Anvil. Not only does it exile all the tokens that you make from it, it exiles the Anvil itself, and it can be just brutal for that. So I think it's definitely seeing sideboard play there against those matchups. This card also exiles treasure and blood tokens, provided the opponent doesn't have an instant way to use them. It also exiles things like Reckoner Bankbuster and 2 mana artifacts the opponent might be using in a control mirror to generate advantage over the long haul. Now, not every deck will want this card, but I think in certain matchups, this can absolutely be devastating. I'm going to give this card an 8 out of 10. This next card has a lot to unpack. This is Urza Assembles the Titans. This is a saga enchantment for 2 white and 3 generic with the new mechanic Read Ahead. If you're not familiar with Read Ahead, essentially it allows you to choose which chapter you want this to come in on. Then it progresses through the remaining chapters, then goes to the graveyard like normal. If you skip chapters, you cannot go back to them, so you're trading overall value for flexibility with these read-ahead sagas. Urza Assembles the Titans, Chapter 1 states, Scry 4, then you may reveal the top card of your library. If a Planeswalker card is revealed this way, put it into your hand. So obviously you want to maximize the number of Planeswalkers you have in the deck. This basically only functions optimally in a control deck based around Planeswalkers, like something like Esper's Super Friends, something with a lot of Planeswalkers in it. Also, being able to scry 4 in a control deck is not nothing, and it shouldn't be discounted. If you reveal a Planeswalker, you're able to line up your next 3 draws if you like the cards, or you can filter bad draws to the bottom of your deck, and that's a good effect that's tacked on here for Chapter 1. Chapter 2 states, you may put a Planeswalker card with mana value 6 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. So, basically any Planeswalker currently in Standard you're able to put on the battlefield for free. Good effect. It'll allow you to hold up counter magic or some other spell and have a Planeswalker on the field. Chapter 3 states you may activate the loyalty abilities of Planeswalkers you control twice this turn rather than only once. And this is a very powerful effect. It only becomes amplified the more Planeswalkers that you have. Being able to tick up Planeswalkers twice gets you that much closer to their ultimates, and if you're at parity, maybe you're able to generate some advantage here. The thing I don't like about this card is the fact that if you're behind versus aggro, there is no time for this. Even reading ahead to Chapter 2 feels bad because you're getting maybe a 1 mana discount on a Planeswalker if it costs 6. Most Planeswalkers cost between 3 and 5 right now anyway. Reading ahead to Chapter 3 feels good if you already have a few Planeswalkers out, but in that case you're probably winning the game anyway. I don't honestly know how to judge this card right now. It could be great in a slower meta, but in a fast meta this feels almost unplayable simply because you don't have the time. Let me know what you think in the comments. Right now I'm just going middle of the road, 5 out of 10 on this. Our final card for today is Valiant Veteran. This is a cool card. It's a Soldier Lord for 1 white, 1 generic that pumps all your soldiers. Normally these things cost 3, so it's cool to see it for 2. And when it dies, you're able to spend 2 white and 3 generic to exile it from a graveyard and give permanent +1/+1 counters to all of your soldiers. So if you're in a soldier-based aggro deck, this can be helpful because your mana curve will probably top off at around 4 anyway, so if the game is going longer than you planned, this can really assist just enough to close out that game. The thing about this card is that there are actually a lot of soldiers in Standard, even after rotation. Brutal Cathar is a soldier. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, is a soldier. Savior of Allenbach, which didn't see much play, but could see a comeback here if Soldier Tribal is worth it. That is a soldier. I would normally rate a Lord a little bit lower in Standard for the limited card pool, but the fact that there are so many good soldiers available, I think makes this card potentially quite good. And the fact that if it's killed, it can still contribute to pushing damage through, I'm going to give it a 7. Thanks for checking out the video. Dominaria United releases on MTG Arena September 1st, and you better believe I'll be playing with a ton of new decks. I'm super excited about it. If you're interested in those videos, more set reviews, and basically everything MTG and MTG Arena, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel and allows me to make more content. I'm also going to close this video by saying that these ratings are my impressions having not played with any of these cards. Obviously, as the meta evolves, things will be better or worse depending on the environment, and if you disagree, I'm always open to hearing your thoughts. Just drop a comment below. Thank you very much, and have a great day.